It's the evening of Christmas Day, and we're standing in the hallway of my Aunt Colette's house. We're starting the only sacred family tradition we have. We're about to sing. This is Hooray for the Pudding. Here's the idea. We put a Christmas pudding on a plate and light it on fire. One person is picked to carry it, and we all march around the house singing over and over. And this Christmas, because we're in Colette's house, we're going outside and down the road to Eileen's, with the flaming pudding lighting the way. The only point here really is to make complete fools of ourselves. And a lot of the time, that's the spirit of the Walls family, to not take life too seriously. Naturally, I've always been aware of the darker shades in our story. Tusker Rock isn't a secret. But it's while making this programme that I realised how many details I didn't know. And when I come back to Eileen's house a few weeks after Christmas, I hear one of those details that makes me appreciate I really haven't understood the full picture.
There were a lot of them, and they went on for years and years and years. My teenage years. In the dream, I'd be saying, that was a dream, the last time. It's not really, Daddy. Oh, no, Eileen, this time it is. And maybe Daddy in the dream would come to me and say, no, it really is. Really, really, really. And each dream got stronger and stronger, but this time it's true. And I'd wake up with such a feeling of disappointment.
To give you a sense of the ways the crash at Tusker Rock affected my family, I need to take you back to the 30 years from 1968 to 1998. And here's how we're going to do that. I got this from the archives. It's my granny, Claire Walls, chatting on RTE radio to Gay Byrne in March of 1998. This is a week before the 30th anniversary of the Tusker Rock crash.
Good morning to you, Claire.
Good morning, Gay.
And thank you for joining us.
Not at all.
Now, Claire's husband was Desmond Walls.
And even though my granny was only on the show for about 10 minutes, when we listen to her, we can start to get inside those 30 years.
I know, Claire, you went to the airport with some of the children to see him off.
I did.
And that you could see him waving from the second window seat.
That's right.
In the days after the crash, memorial ceremonies were held in Cork. But it wasn't a funeral for Desi. His body was never found. Just 14 bodies from the 61 victims were recovered. This is Kevin.
My dad's body was never found. From his point of view, it was probably fine. He loved the sea. And he'd probably be happy to be buried in the sea, but there was no funeral. There was nothing. There was no funeral. There was a memorial, which was really an opportunity for the government. I met every frickin' minister in the government that weekend. And they all came to Cork and showed up, and all the executives from Aer Lingus, and it was a national memorial. It wasn't a memorial for me. I was never at my dad's funeral, and to this day I haven't been. It pisses me off.
As the eldest of the 12 children, Claire became very close with her mother in the year after the crash.
I slept with her for those few nights. She asked me to come and sleep with her. And she knelt down by the side of the bed. And she said, I've no idea what to pray for or to or what. Oh. I asked her a few months later if she would ever marry again. She said, you must be joking. What man in the world would take on this family? So she never ever talked about my father. She never grieved.
My mum is Christine. She was 8 when her dad died.
The week after he died, we had this little wall out the back garden, and I was sitting on that wall and saying, I know I'm supposed to feel very sad, and I know there's something really wrong around here. But I had no idea really why I was to feel sad. I just didn't have any understanding of the concept that he was never coming back.
But time moves on. This is Patricia.
I can remember one day walking into her room and seeing her take his clothes away. And she was clearing out the wardrobe. And like this was some months later, you know. And I think Claire might have been helper, and then somebody else like Kevin or Desi or whoever walked in, and everybody was crying, you know.
So when did you move back to Dublin then, Claire?
I moved back a year later. I decided I needed a little more support.
Claire and Desi Jr. stayed behind in Cork.
Suddenly I was living on my own because the choice was to go to Dublin with my mother or to stay and hang around with friends and girlfriend and so forth, so connections I had. And I went into depression pretty quickly. I was in a job, I got a job as a management trainee, and I would go into the business dressed in my father's suits. You know, I was the only one who could fit them. I probably put on a little bit of weight to fit them. And I felt that was the thing to be. There was just I think they call it survivor syndrome, where if you're the one who lives on, you feel you must do something to fill the gap.
This is my mum, Christine, again.
Her attitude always was, you've got to fight it, you've got to get on with it. Just got to get on with your life.
Yeah.
So I think she was absolutely heartbroken and said she had no desire to live for about 2 years after. So that's why I say we didn't lose our father, we lost our father and our mother for 2 years. That is the truth. We struggled, and from where I was standing, struggled more for the loss of my mother than the loss of my father. It wasn't that she didn't cook, she did. You know, she didn't neglect us. We went to school every day. Everything was normal. But emotionally, I'd say she had just shut down.
In 1970, the first report on the crash was published. Here's the abridged version. The plane took off from Cork and continued normally until crossing over into the airspace of London Air Traffic Control. Within 41 seconds of crossing over, they sent a message to London saying, 12,000 feet, descending, spinning rapidly. The report found that the plane flew in a disabled condition for at least 10 minutes, after which it crashed into the Irish Sea.
Do you think they had time, that they knew they were going to die, or do you think it happened very suddenly?
The story we're told is that they had 10 minutes. And it's funny, that was the bit that always was so hard to take.
Yes.
You know, the whole idea, I expect that at the time they'd hope, but there you are.
Investigations in 1970 were much less precise operations than they are today. There was no black box or flight recorders, and only part of the plane was recovered from the sea. So ultimately, all they can do is put forward theories on the causes of the crash. And the conclusion that they reach is,
there is not enough evidence on which to reach a conclusion of reasonable probability as to the initial cause of this accident.
But there was one other line, a piece of speculation that you'd never find in a report today. And this would lead to decades of questions and conspiracy theory.
If the evidence of time of impact is accepted, the conclusion that there was such another aircraft in the area is inescapable. There remains the possibility that an unmanned aircraft, either a drone target aircraft or a missile, might have been there.
The suspicion was that an operation from a British military base on the Welsh coast or from a British naval ship in the area had led to the disaster, possibly an unmanned drone or even a missile causing the plane to crash. The British Ministry of Defence always denied this, but in the political climate of the time, hinting that the blame lay across the water in Britain was a theory that found plenty of sympathetic ears. The conspiracy theories were only fuelled by the fact that the British Navy had botched an attempt to retrieve the plane wreckage. They lifted the fuselage from the sea and then dropped it again, ruining any chance of full recovery.
Des's body was never found.
No, it was not. I had hopes when they raised the plane that they might, because he was so near the front. But it didn't happen.
This is Eileen.
Not seeing the body kind of was like, well, maybe he's not dead. You know, that's maybe what a 10-year-old mind does. I imagined that he was washed up on the shore in England, alive, like, and that he'd suffered concussion. I'd make up that story, you see. That way then he'd be still alive.
What age were you when you thought this?
11, maybe?
How long
10,
did you
11,
keep
12.
thinking it?
Oh, years. So I never grieved him.
There was always that hanging over you, you know, where you just don't get the proof. And I think you have to go through that to understand why it makes a difference to have a body. You know, you kind of go, it's not going to bring him back. But it does something for relatives. It definitely gives some sort of closure. Where you have this kind of mystery. Well, for us, for kids, we were imagining him on a desert island, you know. Coming in with a big beard. Coming home with a big beard. Tanned feet. Yeah.
Desi was 19 when he lost his dad. The last time he saw him was when he slammed the car door and stormed off on the night before his dad died.
I had a madness about it. I was in London a couple of years after my father died, struggling, really struggling. I'd have a job, maybe I wouldn't have a job, then I get, yeah. And I would be wandering the street, hoping to see him. The plane had been flying towards London. So therefore, there was some part of my totally crazy mind thought, isn't it possible that that wasn't the plane he got on, he got in a different plane? And, you know, that's even gone more logical than I did at the time. I just thought he was going to London. He might be there. He might be there. He might have lost his memory. There might be some reason. And anyway, I spent time in London with him when I was a teenager and when I was a kid. So maybe I'll see him there again.
Because there was no cause for the crash established, and therefore nobody to blame, the only compensation available was limited to the minimum.
My mother was fighting Aer Lingus because Aer Lingus said under the Warsaw Convention, damages for an aircraft that goes down outside the borders of the country is limited to £7,000. My mother argued it and said, hang on a second. So she took a case against Aer Lingus.
And that was even more complicated than it should have been, because two of my granddad's brothers worked at Aer Lingus. One was Dermot, who worked in the maintenance department, and the other was Arthur, who was the deputy general manager of the airline.
All her dealings were with Arthur, her brother-in-law. So she'd have arguments with Arthur about, it's kind of like it's surreal. You shouldn't be arguing with your brother-in-law about the compensation that you're going to get for your husband going down in a plane crash. You know, it was strange. And that went on for quite some time. She eventually settled for about £18,000. No, I got £400 when I was 21. It's not a bad price for your dad, is it? No. I'm sorry being flippant. It was stupid.
And because there was no cause and nobody to blame, the conspiracy theories grew.
The cause of the crash has remained a mystery, but one of the theories has always been that another aircraft or perhaps a missile was involved.
I know that you don't tend to speculate on what happened or the details of the crash or whatever. Nothing matters. That doesn't particularly matter to you.
But I must say I would love some sort of,
final resolution.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much speculation.
Yes.
That it's very difficult to know what's what.
John was the youngest. He never knew his father.
He used to say to me when he was about 5, Mammy, would you marry again because I need a daddy? I think when they go to school and everybody else has daddies, it's a very big loss.
Yes.
Never to have known one.
Yes.
But he grew up surrounded by stories about his death.
There was always articles. Every anniversary there was an article. There were books written about it. It was this controversy that went on, and it sort of played into the whole narrative of sort of Anglo-Irish relations at the time. And when things were bad between Ireland and England, somebody would bring up the crash and say, "Oh yeah, they shot the plane down." And as I said, it was very easy to jump on the bandwagon and hope that was the case, and because that would have given us a grievance to. Would have been just great to have somebody to pin it on and to get angry about it.
Colette was 2 years old when the plane crashed.
If we had come to a conclusion or even felt like somebody was trying to come to a conclusion, I think we might have been better able to close the book.
Would you talk about it much?
To the point that Mammy used to ask us to stop talking about it. Regularly. I do remember regularly she would ask us to stop. We would, I wouldn't say we obsessed about it, but we'd go through phases of just talking about it a lot. Because there were so many ridiculous theories out there. You can't blame us for having mad notions,
Over the course of 3 decades, the suspicion of British involvement grew to almost just become an assumption. When I was young, my very basic understanding of all of this was that the most likely cause was a British missile. But as enormous as it was, Tusker Rock did not define the family.
They all ended up doing extremely well.
Well, they did quite well, yes.
They did
and
indeed.
I must say they're all very happy in their way.
Yes.
Now, they all claim that it has made a big difference. You know, they miss him terribly.
As the kids grew up, the house in Dublin became a lively one and a busy one. It was full of music and parties, and it was always open to friends. Colette grew up as a teenager in a family that was rapidly changing from the one it had been in Cork, and with a mother who was changing too.
I think she just decided, I'm not going to fight this, and she just basically had open house as long as you didn't abuse it. So people would call for Paddy and Paddy would stay in bed. They'd just hang out with us for a couple of hours. Yeah, it was very relaxed house, I have to say. And that was all down to Mum.
Did she relax in the years after?
She just all of a sudden changed and calmed down. The story was that she used to be very angry, and she just stopped being angry. I don't know whether she just made it. Knowing her, she did. She just sat down and said, right, I'm not doing that anymore.
And Granny moved on too. Once the kids were reared and out of the house, she built a home in Slayhead in County Kerry.
You've settled now in Kerry beside Slayhead.
I have, indeed, yes.
In regal splendour, Claire.
I have, absolutely. It's one of those places that I saw for the first time shortly after Desi died, and it just had this magnificent, peaceful effect on me. Still has, so I'm down here. Took me 20 years to get here, but I got here.
So we moved through the 80s and the 90s. The 12 kids become adults and the family grows, and from the 13 left after the crash, we're approaching about 80 of us in the family now. And then 1998, something changes. A commemoration ceremony is planned.
I believe a great deal was healed when, at the 30th anniversary, there was a big gathering of people in Cork. I was involved in organising it.
At that commemoration, things change a lot, and in a few ways.
The 30th helped a lot. To talk about it, even the fact that my brother, I mean, I only remember Kevin, but I know there were several siblings who said, oh, I had those dreams too. But it's Kevin I remember, because he got quite emotional telling us. And I remember thinking, I wasn't as on my own as I thought I was when I heard about the dreams. That's kind of sad, isn't it? That we didn't talk more.
This is something I've heard from several of the siblings. That 30 years was a marker. It was a moment of healing. The anniversary service in Cork and the weekend around it would also be the spark for the most significant development made yet in finding out what had happened to Flight 712. A group of relatives banded together with the aim of finally uncovering the true cause. My mum's uncle Arthur was there that weekend, and you'll remember he was the Deputy General Manager of Aer Lingus at the time of the crash. When he was speaking to my mum, he said something that he hadn't said to her before.
He just kept saying, planes fall out of the sky. You know, they can just fall out of the sky. And he kind of said it a lot. If I remember correctly, he was saying that, yeah, there could have been something wrong with the plane. That was what I was picking up. That was his interpretation of it. But he wasn't saying there was definitely something wrong with that plane. He was just saying, you know.
Arthur didn't talk about the crash very often, but 30 years before, he had said this to Claire.
At the very beginning, Uncle Arthur said, we have no idea, but the most likely thing that happened is that a piece of metal rusted possibly in the toilet and dropped and damaged the cable to the tail. He said that to me within a couple of weeks of the accident.
Now, to be clear, as Claire remembers it, Arthur was putting forward a theory here. To the best of my knowledge, he didn't know anything beyond that. But he knew planes, and this was his best guess at the time. What we do know is that Aer Lingus did not publish their internal investigation, and it was Arthur who led the investigation into the crash in which his brother lost his life. In 1998, he spoke to RTE about that report.
I know of nothing whatsoever, nothing, either in the personnel, the procedures, the aircraft or the maintenance, that, in my opinion, contributed to the accident. I didn't know then, I don't know now. I understand the public interest even so much later, but it's based on the wrong assumption that there is always an answer.
And even in 1998, the author of the 1970 report, Richard O'Sullivan, was adamant that the conclusion of another aircraft in the sky that day still held firm.
No, nothing is more probable.
In fact, I think you used the term inescapable.
I might have. I might have.
O'Sullivan investigated the crash, but also...
It shambles, it was a few years later, but it was investigated by a man called O'Sullivan, who was the man who signed the airworthiness certificate 6 weeks before that plane went down.
The state was owner, regulator and investigator. And it's in 1998 that the families finally start to get some answers. Minister for Public Enterprise Mary O'Rourke announced there will be a review of the original report. The Air Accident Investigation Unit review the files connected to the crash, and they make some pretty striking findings.
The possibility of a cause other than a collision or near collision with another airborne object, being the initial case of the upset to the St. Phelim, does not appear to have been adequately examined in the 1970 report.
The 1970 investigation had found an answer of sorts and settled on that without looking too hard for any other possible causes. And that wasn't all.
But this latest report, published today, has uncovered significant new evidence. It reveals that maintenance records relating to the Aer Lingus Viscount plane from a routine check in 1968 were found to be missing by 1969. This was known but not included in the government report of 1970. The Minister said the revelations are profoundly shocking.
I'm making it very clear. In this report, we've made it abundantly clear that it is inexplicable and incomprehensive that information was not put into the 1970 report.
Who should have included that?
The person who wrote the report, clearly.
This means there's a serious conflict of interest with the investigator of this crash. There's a report that fails to properly explore all possibilities, and we have a plane that was missing key maintenance records.
The Minister has now appointed 2 international air crash investigators to carry out a new study.
What they would discover would turn the entire story of Tusker Rock on its head and bring some of the closure that people had waited 30 years for.
Claire, thank you for joining us, and I send you my very, very best regards.
Thank you very much, Kay.
My very best to you.
Good
morning.
luck.
Good morning to you.